6 News at 6:30, and thanks so much for staying with us for a special edition for tonight's newscast. I'm Betsy Singer, along with my colleague Ross Becker, and we are at Soldiers Field Memorial. Behind us is one of the many ceremonies taking place across the country to honor and remember those who lost their lives on 9/11, of course, this country's worst terror attacks on U.S. soil. We are going to be talking with some folks who have children in the military this half hour. We'll also be talking about where we were and what we went through. As part of the media, our perspective is a lot different. But at the same time, we're human, and when we were home, and this happened on September 11th, 2001, right around between 8 and 9 o'clock, our time, Central Time, I know I got a phone call because I didn't have the TV on, and I didn't know that this had happened, and my sister called and said, "Are you watching the news?" And I'm like, "No, not yet. Why? What happened?" And so she explained what happened. I called in to work at the news station here in Rochester and knew that I had to go in right away. Your experience was a whole lot different, though, because you were in the state of Kentucky. You were running radio stations.
I was, and I was still at home, Betsy, in the morning, because it happened early. It was Eastern time in Kentucky. And I remember standing there watching the television set, having my coffee, going, "What's going on? Why is the World Trade Center burning?" And that was after the first hit, and no one really knew what was going on.
We didn't know it was a terror attack.
We did not, but I remember the moment when I saw that. I was standing in the hallway, and I'm looking at the TV, and I remember the moment when that second plane hit the second tower, and it was like a punch in the stomach, and I immediately knew this was an attack on America. This wasn't an accident anymore. I knew exactly what was going on, and I froze, and I still get chills thinking about that moment, because I knew that the country that I was standing in, that I loved, was under attack at that moment, and I know many of you at home had that same moment.
Yeah, and so when I wanted to speak with you specifically because we worked through this. As we lived through it, we also worked in an industry that saw these images more than most people. Remember the coverage? That was 24/7. We didn't even have local news until, for us, 3 days later.
Yeah, and we saw things that the public still hasn't seen. I mean, there's been so much written and shown about it, but I remember seeing some of the early video coming in from the networks, and it was gruesome. It was, and it still sticks in my mind.
Here in Rochester, one of the officials with the Muslim community reached out to the television station and said, "We want to talk about how this is not all Muslims." We knew by late September 11th, by late in the afternoon, probably by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we knew that this was an Islamic terror group network that had carried out this attack. We knew that this country was under attack, and this local Muslim wanted to tell us to make sure that people weren't all of a sudden targeting every Muslim that they saw.
The key word is anger. We were all angry, and we all had a right to be angry. But where we targeted that anger was confusing to us, because we didn't know. We thought, you know, should we be angry at all Muslims? Should we be afraid of all Muslims? We just didn't know as human beings at that point. We wanted to be angry at somebody, but we didn't know who. And even to this day, some people don't understand and don't know who to be angry at.
1 month after the terror attacks hit, you went to work for a network. You went to MSNBC.
Yes.
And what happened there is unlike any of us in local news experienced.
It was, we talk a lot about PTSD. Everybody I was working with there had PTSD. I mean, they had gone through 2.5 months of hell, frankly, in covering that. And so I was doing some relief work for some of the anchors and so on. And what happened, I mean, just the moments, you know, we were being told in our ear, there was a live picture from Ground Zero. And you know, those recovery operations went on for months and months and months. We would get the producer would say to us, "They found another body." And that's all he had to say. And they would take the live picture, and we would have to talk about the firefighters or the National Guard members who were working and sifting through that dust and sifting through that rubble, pulling another body out, sometimes covered with a flag because it was a firefighter, sometimes not because it wasn't. But even months after that attack, they were pulling remains out of that pile down at Ground Zero, and we were reporting on it, and there was nothing to say. All you could say was, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take you live to Ground Zero. The picture tells the story. The rescue workers have found another body in the rubble at Ground Zero. Let's watch as they bring it out. And that's all we could say.
And we spent a good probably 3 months as we covered news as journalists, trying to keep our own emotions in check, not knowing what was going to happen, one, to our country, and two, within our communities, and what that meant for our families. We know that you can absolutely relate as well. We all lived through that. It was a difficult, somber time, but as we are now 19 years out from when that happened, how much has changed? In this half hour, we remember. Back to ABC 6 News at 6:30, where we are at the Soldiers Field Veterans Memorial. Earlier, there was a ceremony because of 9/11, remembering those who have died. Ceremonies like this are taking place all across the country. And in this half hour, as we've heard from a father of one of our current military members, Ross Becker and I are talking a little bit about our experience and, as journalists, covering this, me on the local level, and for Ross from a network and on a national level. It's a lot different. I remember after probably 4 months or so, we went into schools to talk to students about 9/11, and it's really different having conversations with kids who are 7, 8 years old. And being in a newsroom, this was personal for you and me. We're adults, we're covering this as our jobs, but a lot of the kids who I spoke to at the time are now the ages where a lot of our reporters are in the newsroom currently.
It's amazing. I was thinking about this today, that many of the reporters that are going to be covering this story were in elementary school when it happened. And I get that, because I was in elementary school when John Kennedy was assassinated. So I understand it from that perspective. I saw that assassination much differently than my parents did. So I'm wondering what today's generation of young people, young professionals, whether they be in the medical profession or in journalism or wherever, how they're going to, in a sense, react to a day like today, to 9/11. For them, it's much more intellectual. Maybe for us, and maybe it is. Maybe for us, it's more emotional. For them, it's more intellectual. It's more understanding history, and for us, it's understanding feelings. Maybe that's the way it is. And I bring it up only because maybe we can have that discussion at home. Maybe you can have that discussion with your kids or the young people in your family. This is the day to have that discussion, I think. And I thank you for letting me be part of this today.
And to reminisce, that's a big part of, and we talked about this a lot in the years after 9/11, a big part of healing for people who were at Ground Zero. It is all about talking about what happened. We had a man who was a first responder from Florida who went to Ground Zero right the day after the attacks happened, and he was pulling out bodies. They were right in the midst of everything, and I ended up meeting him because he came here to Rochester for medical treatment because he was so severely shouldn't say injured, but...
Well, he is injured. He's emotionally injured.
But
yes.
he suffered a lot of health complications because of being at Ground Zero. He has since died. He died 5 years ago. And those who were there at Ground Zero, did you talk to people?
Yeah.
I only talked to a couple.
I was lucky enough, and I say lucky because, again, I am lucky to be able to experience these things. I went back on the first anniversary of 9/11, and I went to Firehouse Number 1, the first firehouse to respond to 9/11 in New York City. And I talked to some of the firefighters there. They were laying out their gear that day. There was going to be a ceremony. They were going to ring the bell for each one of the victims of their fire station. And you could still see it in their eyes. I mean, it was still shock of what had happened. This is their beloved city. When you're a New York firefighter, when you're a Rochester firefighter, or an Austin or Albert Lee fire, this is your city. It belongs to you. And somebody attacked it that day. And so they were on the front lines. And they saw their fellow firefighters swallowed up by some of the debris in this building. They ran toward it, as we always say. They didn't run away from it. And so, yes, I was able to talk with some of them, and they still, what they want to do is they talk about their friends. They use their names. Yeah, Johnny was great. Yeah, Frankie was great. They used their first names because that's what they wanted to do. They told me they wanted to keep those memories alive, those people, those heroes. And we use that way too much. There's one other thing, Betsy, I just want to say. Even today, there are people walking around who are of the Muslim faith who still feel attacked. Mm-hmm. And they feel, whether it's real or not, they feel the looks, the stares. That's just not right. That's just not something we should be doing in this country. It's understandable from an overall picture because of what happened, but it's not right from a personal picture. And I just wanted to put that out there.
Not only that, but as members of the media, not only is it our job to provide information, we have a huge responsibility. And some days the line gets real blurry. And a lot of times we try to show the compassion as human beings when we present the news and the stories that our reporters go out on every day. It's not always easy, but for some reason we stay in it.
I'm glad Osama bin Laden paid the ultimate price for what he did. I'm also glad that so many people are every day, one step at a time, trying to heal from what was one of the worst days of this country's history.
We'll wrap things up in just a minute.